Jungkook, and what about you? Why do you have so many scars on your back? Wine's eyes widened after hearing that question, and she left his finger, feeling emotionless once again as she remembered her past. Jungkook noticed that she left his hand and her hand was almost trembling, so he turned around. Jungkook, it's okay if you don't want to talk. I don't want you to have another anxiety attack, he said and immediately vanished into thin air, leaving Vine alone, standing at her place. He returned after a few seconds, stood far away from her, and said, You can tell me if you need anything, he said, and before Vine even raised her face to look at him, he was nowhere to be seen. Vine unknowingly moved the corner of her lips to smile, which immediately made her trembling hands at rest. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt like the calm before the storm. Jungkook sat in his study, staring blankly at the documents spread across his desk, not able to focus because of what's been happening. He was lost in his thoughts when a sudden crash was heard from outside. He immediately rushed there to see, and the front door of the mansion had been blown off. The sound of rapid gunfire filled the air. Jungkook's heart raced as he sprang to his feet, grabbed his gun from the desk drawer. His men, trained and ready for such emergencies, immediately got into action. The hallways were soon filled with the sound of gunfire and the shouts of men as they engaged the attackers. But amidst all of this, a piercing scream came through the guest room, where Vine was staying, sending a chill down Jungkook's spine. It was a sound he hadn't heard in weeks, a sound that took him back to a time where whenever these gunshots happened, he would hear the scream from his sister. Jungkook's eyes widened as he ordered his men to take care of this, and he rushed inside the guest room. She was huddled in a corner, her hands covering her ears, her body trembling with fear. The sight of her so vulnerable and scared brought a surge of protectiveness that Jungkook hadn't felt in a long time. He rushed to her side, kneeling down and wrapping his arms around her. Susie, it's me, Jungkook, he said urgently, his voice softening despite the chaos outside. You're safe. I've got you. Vine clung to him, her fingers digging into his shirt as she buried her face in his chest. Her body shook with sobs, and Jungkook could feel her heart pounding against his own. He held her tighter, his hand getting gently stroking her hair, trying to soothe her. It's okay, he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and guilt. I won't let anything happen to you. The gunfire outside seemed to intensify, but in that moment, all he could focus on was Vine. He pulled back slightly, cupping Vine's face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. He wiped them away with his thumb, his gaze locking onto hers. Listen to me, he said firmly. I need you to stay here. Keep the door locked. I have to go and make sure these are dealt with. Vine shook weakly, her grip on his shirt tightening slightly. Please, please don't leave me alone, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. Jungkook took a few seconds to look into her eyes, At that time, he knew it was Vine and not his sister, but he looked at her as someone who would make him escape that guilt and terror that he felt when he wasn't able to save Susie. He looked at her as someone he wanted to protect. Jungkook smiled and nodded, his fists loosening. He hugged her back and kept patting her hair. All right, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay with you. After a few minutes, calmness fell down again. Everything went silent and Jungkook smiled. You're safe now, he murmured, his voice filled with a promise. I won't let anything happen to you. Vine clung to him, her fear slowly coming down to a weak sense of safety. And for the first time in a long while, Jungkook allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for repentance in the midst of all the darkness. He broke the hug and stood up, offering his hand to Vine, which she looked at for a few seconds before accepting it. He made her stand up and then took her to the bed to sit on. Jungkook sat beside her, a foot far away, and asked, Are you okay? Vine nodded weakly, and they sat there for a few minutes in silence. Jungkook didn't know why he was keeping her there anymore. Would he even be able to do anything to her? Or if not, then why wasn't he letting her go? The questions filled his mind before he said to her, I want to talk to you. I know this is not the time. You're scared, but it needs to be done right now. Vine sat down, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. What do you want to talk about? Jungkook took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I need you to understand something. What your father did to my sister, it's unforgivable. But I can't bring myself to hurt you. You're not responsible for his actions. Vine looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. Then what do you want from me? Jungkook looked down. I don't know yet. All I know is that I can't let you go until I figure this out. I need to find a way to make your father pay without becoming the monster he is. There was a long silence as Vine processed his words. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of humanity in Jungkook's eyes, a hint of the man he used to be before the world had hardened him. I will help you, she said softly, surprising even herself with the suggestion. Jungkook looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. You would help me? Vine nodded, her resolve growing stronger. If it means stopping my father from hurting anyone else, then yes, I will help you, she said, looking into his eyes. A tense silence filled the room as they stared at each other, both aware that this unlikely bond could change everything. Jungkook, why are you so determined? Vine looked down as she started explaining to him the reason, and that was only because she wasn't scared of him anymore. Vine, because I know how much of a monster he can be if he can hurt his own daughter to the point that she wants to die. Vine took a deep breath and continued. You asked me about the scars, right? She smiled. They are given by him. He wants me to become a mafia, take lives. But I just can't do it no matter how much he beats me, burns me, or even strangles me. Vine, even while trying her best, couldn't control her tears from falling down. I tried to escape so many times, but he would get me back there. I thought dying would make me escape, but she smiled through her tears. I couldn't even do that. She put her hands on her forehead and started crying loudly. Jungkook felt a panic of guilt and anger twist in his chest as he listened to Vian's confession. Her tears fell freely, her body shaking with the weight of her torment. He looked at her crying, and for some reason it broke his heart. It was just a few seconds ago that he decided to protect her, and now she told him this. His heart was hurting, but he didn't know what to say at that moment. He just looked at her, which made his heart burn more for her. He wanted to hug her, tell her that it's gonna be fine, now that he was with her. But he hesitated. After a few seconds, Vine wiped her tears, taking a deep breath as she tried to regain her composure. I didn't want to tell you, but she said softly, it feels good to finally say it to someone who listens. Jungkook nodded, his lips moving for a smile. Don't worry, you're in my territory now. I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. They looked at each other, and silence fell again, until they could hear their own heartbeats getting loud and fast. The sound of footsteps approaching the guest room made them both hold their breaths. Jungkook gestured Vine to be quiet as he quickly moved to the door, his gun raised, ready to protect Vine, whose heart was thundering in her chest. To be continued.